Hey everyone, Wes Taranto here. Hope everyone had a good couple of weeks. So this is my update for just the short story discussion board, plus then the follow-up assignment after the bios were put up, as well as the stars. So apologize for the delay, but it was some good reading, but it's also a fair amount, so it's good. But just so you know that I'm not making this all up, let's see what's happened. As of today, the G7 summit, Trump destroyed every piece of work they did with a tweet or several tweets, and made some serious threats on Trudeau. So Washington Capitals won the Stanley Cup final. That was a big one. And Rob Ford won the Ontario provincial election. So we have had a lot of change, a lot of interesting times, and if nothing else, you clearly know this is real. Okay, let's take a look here. So short stories, Sultana's Dream, a lot of different viewpoints of antagonists, protagonists, the actual main character potentially being both, men being the antagonist. Some of the key comments that I got from reading it. A lot of people seem to be able to relate better to these characters. A big focus, obviously, on gender equality and feminism, and keeping in mind afterwards when you read the bio where this person was when writing this story. You know, a lot of artists and writers talk about being products of their environment. Even the rap group NWA used that very line. You know, it's interesting when you think about what you focus on based on either how you grew up or how you've lived. Antagonists, also the concept of caging a weaker sex to allow the others to flourish. Lots of focus on the feminist aspect of it. And you can see the impact it had on their society and their viewpoint of society. Some people felt it wasn't very well written. Hard to tell who was speaking. Keep in mind when these stories were written, I know when you read them first you would have known that, but these are not new stories. These are very old, not very old, but old enough. And so they would have been written in a different language with a different aspect to them. So keeping that in mind. Triumph of the Mechanics. More cut and dry, very funny. You know, a lot more quotes I got with this one. Control the town, control the power type concept. And very true. Abundance of power is not to be abused. A lot of people felt it was well written. I got a couple lackluster endings. And like a giant joke within an important message behind it. Yes, that's a very interesting approach to that comment, and also a very accurate comment as well. I like the deception side of it. I thought that was well done in that story as well. So anyway, good reviews. I appreciate it. Some great comments, some really interesting input. And then I followed it up with adding in The Star by H.G. Wells, which is one of the most famous writers of all time, obviously, in the science fiction genre. You know, super well recognized. And then I asked you to compare off those stories. So, you know, A, which one did you think was best? And boom, 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 in third, The Star. The Star finished last in your ranking. To be honest, you're not the first class to have it rank last. It's just interesting to see how one of the more influential writers of the time, and historically viewed as one of the great science fiction writers and people who really jumped the genre forward, gets the worst review. Then Sultana, then Triumph of the Mechanic. It was interesting. Triumph of Mechanics basically got like more than double than the most likes over the other two almost, and Star was a ways behind even Sultana. So it's just interesting to see different writing styles, and keep in mind the two, except for excluding the Star, the others were not written in English and were translated later. So that's interesting as well. To think that a great story is just a great story. I think that's important to recognize. So in The Star, some of the comments were poetic. Weakest of the stories, obviously, was a major theme, and most realistic. it was interesting. I do like the perspective aspect at the end of it. I thought the end was strong in the story, maybe more so than the middle, just about perception. You see this happen, but depending on your perspective, from the Martian's viewpoint, whatever, right? It was not a big deal. Not too much actually happened in the end. Where on the other side of the coin, it was mass destruction. So in Sultana, a historic view of women's empowerment addresses sensitive topics, which is very true, in keeping in mind, especially where this was and at the time, this would have been very much so a risky topic. And then a lot of people felt it was one of the easiest of the three stories to read. In Triumph of the Mechanics, relevant issues in today's society, most relatable, the lengths people would go to achieve their dream were some of the primary comments to it. It's a great story. And so then, of course, I ask you, okay, now that I give you the bios, and, one's this woman from India, one's a heavily influenced Nazi Party writer, and third being one of the more historical relevant authors. Does it change your opinion? For many, it did not change their opinion of the story, which actually surprised me a little bit. For example, let's look at what's happened just in movies. Kevin Spacey. How many people have seen a Kevin Spacey movie since he's gone down in basically a ball of flames, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to view it. But, they removed him from House of Cards, which was a super successful show, and they did that based on his actions and things that were determined after that happened a long time ago. So, it's interesting to see that a bunch of people really are like, it doesn't change my opinion, and fair enough. And I don't disagree with that comment. I want to be clear, but it was just interesting. Previous classes, a bit more people took offense or did change their opinion. Because they just afterwards, not that they thought the story changed, but they felt maybe they just couldn't enjoy it like they could before. So just using House of Cards, for me is I don't know if I would watch House of Cards the same anymore. It's just one of those things. So just throwing that out there. I like a few extreme comments anyway. It tainted my reading experience. I get that too. I do. I feel the ugliness of his Nazi extremist views seeping through. That's a strong one. I thought it was interesting though, great comment, and if you believe it, okay. As well as the fact that, if I was just curious for the person that made that comment, is that did you actually feel that way before you knew his bio, or was it just after where it made more sense maybe? I'm just curious. That's a curiosity. Your opinion should not be influenced by what kind of life the author had. Good point. I mean, it depends how you view reading. See, reading is one of those, in movies and everything, it's one of those things, it depends on your perception of it. If you believe it's just the story that matters, then that comment's 100% true. If you believe the actors and the purpose behind the story matter, you may disagree, right? So it's very interesting, great points on both sides of the coin. I appreciate everyone's input on this and feedback and comments. So thank you, that was awesome. I had developed, so the image I had developed of the authors changed, but not my opinion of the story. Great, excellent. So I get that as well. But in the person who wrote that comment, my question then is, would you read more of that person's work? Because if you thought it was a great story, would you continue to read it? Just curious, maybe throw me an email to those people if you don't mind. I'd just love to hear what you think. It's important to disconnect the artist from the art. I agree. I think, like I said, I think it really comes down to how you read it. I also think it also depends on your viewpoint. Let's be honest. If you're Jewish, you may have a bit stronger opinion on the impact when it comes to, for example, Triumph of the Mechanic. Or if you're from the culture of that writer, you may view it as a little bit biased or whatever. So, I mean, I think part of it is our history and how we are and how we were raised may influence as well. So, anyway, great comments. Thank you so much. Right now you're working on Johnny Mnemonic. I'm excited to see how many of the technology things you caught that you thought were right or wrong. And do keep in mind when you're writing it or thinking about it, it doesn't have to be 100% right, okay? So if you felt the conceptual concept of it was right from the time, keep in mind, I mean, the time this was written, we didn't, really have internet, we didn't have any of that stuff. So keep in mind that things like this were pretty far-fetched. So did they hit the mark on some things, right? Or did they miss it entirely, which I think there's probably a combo of both. It is very much a timepiece in the sense it was a classic late 80s type movie, but for me it was a fun one. And part of the reason I picked it is I actually met Keanu Reeves when he was young. One of his first films, it was filmed about 60% at my parents' house. I lived there. I was about 8 years old, or 10, something like that. And anyway, he was one of the small actors in it, and I got to play some football with him. The key actor in that one was a guy named Charles Bronson, who was my age category. He was a big guy, had a series called Death Wish and things like that. But and Ellen Burstyn, who was an Academy Award winner, Oscar winner, and big time actress, was in as well. I actually yelled at her. So if anyone wants to hear that story, feel free to ask. But yes, I got to scream at Ellen Burstyn, and she apologized to me. So that was an interesting story. But anyway, thanks so much, everyone. Great job. Wolvie's here just to keep me some company. Hopefully next time I'll be able to bring in my Millennium Falcon Ultimate Collector's Edition that's only partially completed, and maybe it'll be able to keep me company next time. Okay, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Nice seeing everyone. Have a great day.